What this arrogant tech executive didn't know was that the maid he was about to humiliate in front of his wealthy friends was actually the decorated Marine veteran who owned his house, his car, and held the mortgage on his entire lifestyle. Here's what happened when he crossed a line that would cost him everything. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxury penthouse, overlooking downtown Seattle, as Maria Santos quietly arranged fresh flowers in the marble foyer. At 45, she moved with the precise efficiency of someone accustomed to discipline and order. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the same navy blue uniform she'd worn for the past 3 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Comfortable sneakers, pressed slacks, and a polo shirt with residential services embroidered on the chest. To anyone watching, Maria looked like exactly what she appeared to be, a middle-aged Latina housekeeper, going about her daily routine in one of Seattle's most expensive residential towers. She dusted the Italian leather furniture, organized the imported magazines on the glass coffee table, and checked that the temperature was set to exactly 72 degrees, just the way Bradley Whitman preferred it. What no one knew, not Bradley, not his neighbors, not even his closest friends, was that Maria Santos wasn't just the housekeeper, she was the owner. Every square foot of the 4,000 square foot penthouse, every piece of designer furniture, even the German luxury sedan in the building's private garage, it all belonged to her. 3 years ago, Maria had retired from the Marine Corps after 22 years of distinguished service. She'd served 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and had risen to the rank of Master Sergeant before a roadside bomb left her with a Purple Heart and a medical discharge. The military had been her life, but the transition to civilian life had been harder than any combat mission she'd ever faced. That's when she'd discovered real estate. Using her military discipline and strategic thinking, Maria had systematically built a portfolio of rental properties across Seattle. She started small, a duplex in Ballard, a condo in Capitol Hill, but her natural ability to read people and assess risk had served her well in the property market. By the time she purchased the penthouse, she owned 17 properties worth over $12 million. The penthouse had been her crown jewel, a symbol of how far she'd come from the housing projects in East LA, where she'd grown up. But after 6 months of living alone in the massive space, Maria had realized something. She missed having a mission, a purpose beyond just collecting rent checks. That's when she'd come up with her unusual arrangement. Bradley Whitman was a 32-year-old software executive at one of Seattle's tech giants. He made good money, 6 figures, but not good enough to afford a penthouse in the city's most exclusive building. When he'd responded to Maria's carefully worded rental listing, she'd made him an offer that seemed too good to be true. He could live in the penthouse for a fraction of its market rate, but the arrangement came with one condition: she would remain in the apartment as the housekeeper. To Bradley, it had seemed like the deal of a lifetime. He got to live in luxury for less than he'd pay for a studio apartment in Belltown, and he got a full-time housekeeper thrown in for free. He never questioned why the mysterious property owner would make such an arrangement, and Maria's landlord had been very clear in the lease agreement: no questions about the living arrangements, no attempts to contact the actual owner, and absolute respect for the household staff. For 3 years, the arrangement had worked perfectly. Bradley thought he was living his dream life, hosting parties, impressing dates, and playing the role of a successful young executive who could afford Seattle's most expensive real estate. His friends and colleagues were envious of his lifestyle, and Bradley had never been one to correct their assumptions about his wealth. Maria, meanwhile, had found the purpose she'd been missing. Taking care of the penthouse gave her the structure and routine she'd craved since leaving the military. She maintained the apartment with the same attention to detail she'd once applied to keeping her Marines safe and mission-ready. Every morning, she followed the same schedule: coffee at 0600, property management calls at 0630, household maintenance from 0700 to 1200, followed by administrative work on her real estate portfolio. Bradley rarely acknowledged her presence beyond leaving notes about his preferences or asking her to accommodate his social schedule. To him, she was simply part of the apartment's amenities, like the doorman or the concierge service. He called her Maria when he addressed her at all, never Santos and certainly never asked about her background or her life outside of cleaning his bathroom and organizing his closets. The arrangement suited Maria perfectly. She could observe Bradley's character without him knowing her true position, and what she'd observed over 3 years had been educational. Bradley was the kind of man who left dirty dishes in the sink, expecting someone else to clean them. He threw his expensive clothes on the floor and assumed they would magically appear clean and pressed in his closet. He hosted loud parties without considering his neighbors and left messes that took hours to clean up. But worst of all, he spoke about Maria as if she were invisible when his friends visited. "The maid will get that," he'd say when someone spilled wine on the white carpet. "Don't worry about it. That's what I pay her for." Maria had bitten her tongue hundreds of times, remembering the discipline that had served her well in the Corps. She'd learned long ago that the best intelligence came from letting people think you weren't listening, weren't important enough to watch their words around. But today was different. Today, Bradley had invited his 3 closest friends over for what he called a portfolio review meeting. Essentially an excuse to drink expensive whiskey and brag about their financial success. Maria had seen the group before. Trevor Morris, a real estate broker who drove a leased BMW and lived beyond his means. Danny Kim, a cryptocurrency investor who'd gotten lucky during the 2021 bull run. And Marcus Webb, a junior partner at a downtown law firm who wore designer suits to compensate for his lack of actual influence. As Maria prepared the penthouse for Bradley's guests, she noticed something different in his demeanor. He seemed more agitated than usual, more eager to impress. She'd overheard him on the phone earlier talking about showing them who's really made it, and putting them in their place. When she'd served the initial round of drinks, 25-year-old Macallan that cost more per bottle than most people made in a month, Maria had retreated to the kitchen as usual. But the apartment's open floor plan meant she could hear every word of their conversation, and what she heard made her grip tighten on the dish towel she was folding. They weren't just discussing business or investments. They were discussing, and Bradley Whitman was about to learn that some people should never be underestimated, especially when those people hold your entire life in their hands. Trevor Morrison arrived first, his leased BMW gleaming in the building's valet circle. He strode through the penthouse door like he owned the place, immediately gravitating toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Seattle's skyline. "Bradley, my man," he called out, spreading his arms wide. "Every time I come here, I'm reminded why you're the most successful bastard I know." Maria watched from the kitchen as Bradley's chest puffed with pride. She'd seen this performance before. Trevor always laid the flattery on thick, especially when he wanted something. The real estate broker was wearing his most expensive suit, but Maria's trained eye caught the details others missed. The slightly frayed cuffs, the shoes that needed resoling, the watch that looked expensive from a distance, but was actually a convincing knockoff. Danny Kim arrived next, practically bouncing through the door with the manic energy of someone riding high on cryptocurrency gains. "Brad, you beautiful genius," he shouted, immediately pulling out his phone to take photos of the view. "I'm definitely posting this on Instagram. My followers are going to lose their minds when they see where I'm hanging out." Marcus Webb was the last to arrive, and he entered with the calculated composure of someone who believed his law degree made him superior to everyone in the room. He nodded approvingly at the apartment's luxury appointments, running his fingers along the Italian marble countertops like he was appraising real estate. "Gentlemen," Bradley announced, gesturing grandly toward the living area, "welcome to my kingdom." Maria remained in the kitchen, methodically cleaning glasses that were already spotless. To the men in the living room, she was invisible, just part of the apartment's fixtures, no more worthy of attention than the expensive artwork on the wall. "I have to ask," Trevor said, settling into the leather sectional with his whiskey. "How the hell do you afford this place? I mean, I know you're doing well at the tech company, but this has to be what, $8,000 a month?" Bradley's smile faltered slightly. Maria knew the exact amount he paid, $2,800 per month. Less than what most people paid for a one-bedroom apartment in the city. But his friends didn't need to know that. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Let's just say I'm very good at what I do," Bradley replied, deflecting with practiced ease. Plus I've got some arrangements that work in my favor. Danny looked up from his phone, curious. What kind of arrangements? Well, Bradley said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The truth is, I've got this incredible deal with the property management company. They needed someone reliable to house sit this place, and in exchange, I get to live here for practically nothing. Marcus raised an eyebrow. House sitting, what's the catch? Bradley gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. I have to let them keep their maid here. She comes with the place, you know. Takes care of everything, cleaning, organizing. Basically running my life for me. Maria's hands stilled on the glass she was drying. In 3 years Bradley had never explained their arrangement to anyone. And certainly never in such dismissive terms. Wait, Trevor said, his voice rising with interest. You're telling me you get this penthouse and a full-time maid? Dude, you're living like a millionaire on a middle-class salary. Pretty much, Bradley said, clearly enjoying the attention. She handles everything, laundry, cleaning, even grocery shopping. I basically never have to think about household stuff. Danny turned to look toward the kitchen where Maria was working. Is that her? The older Latina woman? That's her, Bradley confirmed. Goes by Maria. Been here for 3 years now. Never causes any problems. Very obedient. Maria felt her jaw clench. In the Marine Corps she'd dealt with her share of disrespect, but it had always been from enemies or adversaries. This was different. This was from someone whose entire lifestyle she was subsidizing. Marcus studied Maria for a moment, then turned back to Bradley. How much do you pay her? Pay her? Bradley laughed. I don't pay her anything. That's the beauty of it. She's the property management company's responsibility. I get all the benefits with none of the cost. What Bradley didn't mention, what he didn't know, was that Maria paid herself a generous salary from the property management company she owned. Every month she transferred money from one of her accounts to another, maintaining the illusion that she was an employee while actually funding the entire arrangement. Trevor shook his head in amazement. Man, you've got it figured out. I pay $1,500 a month just for a cleaning service, and they only come twice a week. The secret, Bradley said, warming to his subject, is knowing how to work the system. You've got to think bigger than just your salary. Find the angles. Exploit the opportunity. Danny was still staring toward the kitchen. Does she speak English? I mean, really speak it? Enough to understand instructions, Bradley replied dismissively. She's not exactly a conversationalist, if that's what you're asking, which is perfect, honestly. The last thing I want is chatty help. Maria had spent over 2 decades giving orders to Marines, managing million-dollar logistics operations, and briefing generals on combat strategy. She spoke 3 languages fluently and held a master's degree in business administration that she'd earned while serving. But to Bradley, she was just the help who wasn't worth a real conversation. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. Can she hear us right now? Probably, Bradley shrugged. But it doesn't matter. She knows her place, never asks questions, never gets involved in my business. It's the perfect arrangement. Trevor raised his glass. Here's to you, Bradley, living the dream while the rest of us are still grinding. As the men toasted Bradley's perceived cleverness, Maria continued her work with the same calm efficiency she'd maintained for 3 years. But something had shifted. The careful balance of their arrangement, the unspoken agreement that had allowed Bradley to maintain his illusions while she maintained her privacy, was beginning to crack. From her position in the kitchen, Maria could see the men settling in for what would clearly be a long afternoon of drinking and boasting. She'd observed enough of Bradley's gatherings to know the pattern. The alcohol would flow, the voices would get louder, and the stories would become more elaborate, as each man tried to outdo the others. What none of them realized was that today's conversation was being recorded. The penthouse's security system, which Maria had installed and controlled, captured everything. Every word, every gesture, every dismissive comment about the maid was being preserved in high-definition digital clarity. As Maria moved silently through her routine, she began to consider her options. For 3 years, she'd maintained this arrangement out of curiosity and convenience. But Bradley's casual disrespect, his assumption that she was powerless and insignificant, was about to cost him more than he could possibly imagine. The afternoon was just beginning, and Maria Santos, decorated Marine veteran, successful business owner, and the actual owner of everything Bradley thought was his, was starting to plan her next mission. As the afternoon wore on, the whiskey flowed freely, and the men's voices grew loud. Maria continued her work, moving through the penthouse with the same quiet efficiency, but she could feel the atmosphere shifting. What had started as casual boasting was evolving into something uglier, a competition to see who could be the most dismissive, the most entitled. Trevor was on his third glass of Macallan when he decided to test the boundaries. "Hey Bradley," he called out loud enough for Maria to clearly hear from the kitchen. "Does your maid do windows? Because I've been thinking about getting someone to clean my place, but I need to know thorough." Bradley laughed, the sound sharp and condescending. "Oh, she's very thorough, aren't you, Maria?" He didn't even turn to look at her as he spoke, addressing her like she was a pet who might respond to her name. Maria paused in wiping down the granite countertop, but didn't respond. In the Marines, she'd learned that sometimes the best intelligence came from letting people reveal their true nature without interference. Danny, emboldened by the alcohol and the group dynamic, decided to join in. "I bet she's grateful for the work, right? I mean, let's be honest. What other options does someone like her have?" "Exactly," Marcus chimed in, his lawyer's voice taking on a lecturing tone. "Bradley's basically providing a public service here, giving employment to someone who probably doesn't have many other opportunities." Maria's grip tightened on the cleaning cloth. Someone like her, the phrase echoed in her mind, bringing back memories of every ignorant comment she'd endured during her military career, every assumption people had made about a Latina woman from East LA who dared to wear the uniform. Bradley was warming to his audience now, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. "The thing is," he said, settling back into his chair like a king holding court, "you have to establish boundaries early. These people need structure, clear expectation. You can't be too friendly, or they start getting ideas above their station." "What kind of ideas?" Trevor asked, leaning forward with interest. "Oh, you know," Bradley waved his hand dismissively, thinking they're part of the family or something. "Trying to join conversations, offering opinions nobody asked for. You have to keep them in their place." Maria felt something cold settle in her chest. For 3 years she'd maintained professional distance, not because she knew her place, but because she'd been studying his character. Every dismissive comment, every assumption about her background and capabilities, had been carefully catalogued. Danny pulled out his phone and aimed it toward the kitchen. "Mind if I get a picture? My girlfriend's been nagging me about getting household help, and I want to show her what good service looks like." "Go ahead," Bradley said magnanimously. "Maria doesn't mind, do you, Maria? She's used to being in the background." The flash went off, and Maria felt her jaw clench. Taking photos of domestic workers without consent, treating them like curiosities to be displayed. It was a level of dehumanization that made her think of some of the worst people she'd encountered in war zones. Marcus stood up, swaying slightly from the alcohol. "You know what I love about this setup, Brad? It's so authentic, like having staff in the old days when people knew their roles." "The old days," Trevor agreed, raising his glass, "when service meant something, when people took pride in doing their jobs without expecting to be treated like equals." Maria's hands stilled completely. The casual racism, the class superiority, the assumption that she should be grateful for the privilege of serving them. It was everything she'd fought against her entire life, wrapped up in expensive suits and designer watches. But Bradley wasn't done. He was enjoying the power too much, the feeling of being superior not just to Maria but to his friends who didn't have staff like he did. "The best part," Bradley continued, his voice getting louder and more animated, "is that she's completely dependent on this arrangement. Where else is a woman like that going to find work that comes with housing? She's probably sending money back to family in Mexico or wherever, so she can't afford to lose this job." Maria felt her blood pressure spike. She'd never mentioned her family to Bradley, never given him any information about her background, beyond what was necessary for their arrangement. His assumptions were built entirely on stereotypes and prejudice. "That's genius," Danny said admiringly. "Built-in job security. She can't complain or make demands, because she needs you more than you need her." Trevor nodded sagely. "It's basic economics. supply and demand. You hold all the cards. Marcus, feeling philosophical from the whiskey, decided to elaborate. It's really about understanding social hierarchies. Some people are meant to lead, others to follow. Some people build empires, others clean them. Bradley stood up, clearly feeling like the master of his domain. Exactly, and the sooner everyone accepts their place in the natural order, the better society functions. That's when he made his fatal mistake. Walking toward the kitchen with his empty glass, Bradley stopped directly in front of Maria, close enough that she could smell the expensive whiskey on his breath. His friends were watching, waiting to see how their alpha would assert his dominance. "Maria," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "I want you to understand something. You work for me. This is my house, my rules, my world. You're here because I allow it, and you'll stay here as long as you remember your place." He paused, looking directly into her eyes for the first time in months, and Maria saw something that made her decision for her. It wasn't just arrogance or entitlement, it was genuine contempt. He truly believed she was beneath him, that her worth as a human being was measured solely by her usefulness to him. "You're lucky to have this job," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Lucky that someone like me is willing to give someone like you a chance. So I don't want to hear any complaints, any requests, any suggestions. You're the help. You're here to serve, not to think." He set his glass down on the counter with a sharp clink, the sound echoing through the suddenly quiet penthouse. "Do we understand each other?" Maria looked at him for a long moment, her expression calm and unreadable. In her peripheral vision, she could see his friends watching the interaction like it was entertainment, waiting to see how the maid would respond to being put in her place. For 3 years, Master Sergeant Maria Santos had maintained her cover, observing and learning. She'd watched Bradley's character reveal itself in small moments, his casual cruelty to service workers, his assumption that wealth equaled worth, his belief that respect was something he deserved rather than earned. But now the mask was off completely. He'd shown his friends exactly who he was, and in doing so he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Maria set down her cleaning cloth with the same careful precision she'd once used to set down her rifle after a mission. When she looked up at Bradley, something in her eyes had changed, a shift so subtle that his drunk friends didn't notice it, but so profound that Bradley himself took an unconscious step backward. "Yes," Maria said quietly, her voice steady and controlled, "I understand perfect." What Bradley didn't understand was that he'd just declared war on the wrong person, and Master Sergeant Maria Santos had never lost a war. Maria stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at Bradley with an expression that made the air in the penthouse feel suddenly heavy. The silence stretched just long enough to make his friends exchange uncertain glances, though they weren't sure why the atmosphere had shifted. Bradley, still riding high on whiskey and his own sense of superiority, didn't notice the change. He was too busy basking in what he thought was a successful display of dominance in front of his audience. "Good," he said with satisfaction, turning back toward his friends. "See how easy it is when you establish clear boundaries. Firm but fair, that's the key to managing staff." Trevor laughed nervously. "Damn, Bradley, you really don't mess around." "Can't afford to," Bradley replied, settling back into his chair. "Give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Trust me. I've learned a few things about managing people over the years." Maria walked slowly toward the living area, her movements deliberate and controlled. She stopped at the edge of the seating area, just close enough to be part of the conversation, but maintaining what appeared to be a respectful distance. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the room. All 4 men turned to look at her, surprise evident on their faces. In 3 years, Maria had never interrupted Bradley's gatherings, never inserted herself into his conversations with guests. Bradley's expression darkened immediately. "What is it, Maria? I thought I made myself clear about interrupting." "You did," Maria replied, her tone remaining perfectly calm. "I just wanted to make sure I understood our arrangement correctly." Danny shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something about Maria's tone, respectful but somehow different, was making him nervous, though he couldn't put his finger on why. Bradley, however, saw this as another opportunity to demonstrate his authority. "Our arrangement is simple," he said loudly, making sure his friends could hear every word. You clean, you organize, you stay out of the way. In return, you get a place to live and steady work. What's confusing about that? Maria nodded slowly. And in this arrangement, you said this is your house, your rules, your world. Is that correct? That's right, Bradley confirmed, his chest puffing with pride. He glanced at his friends, who were watching the exchange with growing fascination. And you believe that I work for you? Maria continued, her voice still steady. That I'm here because you allow it. Exactly, Bradley said, his voice getting louder. Finally, you're getting it. Marcus leaned forward, intrigued by the unusual interaction. In his experience, domestic workers didn't typically engage in philosophical discussions about their employment arrangements. And you think, Maria said, taking a small step closer, that I'm lucky to have this job. Lucky that someone like you would give someone like me a chance. Bradley's smile widened. Now you're understanding the situation perfectly. Maria was quiet for a moment, her eyes moving slowly from Bradley to each of his friends, as if memorizing their faces. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, not louder but somehow carrying more weight. Bradley, she said, and for the first time she didn't call him Mr. Whitman or Sir. I'm going to give you one opportunity to apologize to me and ask your friends to leave. The room went completely silent. Trevor's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Danny's phone slipped from his finger. Marcus straightened in his chair, his lawyer instincts suddenly alerting him that something was very wrong. Bradley, however, was too drunk and too angry to recognize the warning signs. Excuse me? He sputtered, starting to rise from his chair. Did you just give me an ultimatum? In my house? One chance, Maria repeated quietly. Apologize for your disrespect, ask your friends to leave, and we can discuss how to move forward from here. Bradley was on his feet now, his face flushed with rage and alcohol. Are you out of your mind? You work for me. You don't give me ultimatums. You don't make demands. His voice was rising to a shout now, spittle flying from his lips. I can have you out of here in 5 minutes. I can make sure you never work in this city again. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Maria remained perfectly still, her posture straight and balanced. Anyone with military experience would have recognized the stance, loose and ready, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. Actually, she said, her voice cutting through Bradley's tirade with quiet authority, I know exactly who I'm talking to. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. The question is, do you know who you're talking to? Bradley stepped closer, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate her. Yeah, I know exactly who you are. You're the help. You're nobody. You're just some. I'm Master Sergeant Maria Santos, United States Marine Corps, retired. Maria interrupted, her voice snapping with military precision. I served 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and I've been awarded the Purple Heart Bronze Star and Navy Commendation Medal. The effect was immediate and electric. Bradley stumbled backward as if he'd been physically pushed. Trevor dropped his glass, the expensive crystal shattering against the marble floor. Danny's mouth fell open. Marcus went pale. But Maria wasn't finished. More importantly, she continued, pulling a folded document from her pocket. I'm the owner of this penthouse, this building, and the property management company that employs the cleaning service you think you're getting for free. She unfolded the document and held it up, the deed to the penthouse, with her name clearly visible as the owner. I'm also the holder of the lease agreement you signed 3 years ago, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. The lease that you've been violating for the past 6 months, by subletting the guest room to your girlfriend without permission. Bradley's face had gone from red to white in a matter of seconds. That's impossible. The property management company, the property management company is Santos Real Estate Holdings, Maria said calmly, which I founded after retiring from the military with my disability settlement and combat pay savings. I own 17 properties in Seattle, including the building where Trevor's office is located. Trevor made a choking sound, and Danny, Maria continued, turning to look at him directly. The cryptocurrency investment fund you've been bragging about, the one you claim made you rich. I can see your portfolio because you bank at Seattle Community Credit Union, which I own a controlling interest in. Danny's face crumpled. Marcus, she said, her voice taking on the tone of a commanding officer, giving a briefing. Your law firm is currently 3 months behind on rent for their downtown office space. I know because I own that building too, and I've been considering whether to begin eviction proceedings. The room was so quiet that the sound of ice melting in the abandoned drinks was audible. Maria stepped forward, her presence suddenly filling the room in a way that made all 4 men unconsciously step backward. So let me clarify our actual arrangement, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. This is my house. These are my rules. This is my world. You live here because I allow it. And your continued residence depends entirely on your ability to treat me and my property with the respect they deserve. Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Your lease, Maria continued relentlessly, contains a clause about respectful treatment of all household staff. Violation of that clause results in immediate termination of tenancy with no notice period. She paused, letting that sink in. You have 60 seconds to decide whether you'd like to apologize and salvage what's left of this arrangement, or whether you'd prefer to start looking for new housing. Because after what I heard today, Master Sergeant Maria Santos is done pretending to be your maid. The 60 seconds that followed felt like an eternity. Bradley stood frozen in the center of what he'd thought was his living room, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The expensive whiskey in his system seemed to evaporate instantly, leaving him painfully sober and acutely aware of the magnitude of his mistake. Trevor was the first to move, slowly rising from his chair with his hands raised slightly, as if he were surrendering. Miss Santos, he said carefully, his voice cracking slightly. I had no idea. Please, I want to apologize for. Sit down, Maria commanded, her voice carrying the same authority she'd once used to direct Marines under fire. Trevor dropped back into his chair immediately. Danny was frantically scrolling through his phone, probably trying to check his bank account or investment portfolio, his face growing paler with each. Marcus had gone completely silent, his lawyer's mind no doubt calculating the professional and financial implications of having insulted his building's owner. But all eyes were on Bradley, who finally seemed to understand that his entire world had just collapsed around him. I don't understand, he stammered, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. If you own all this, why were you cleaning? Why were you pretending to be? I wasn't pretending to be anything, Maria replied calmly. You assumed I was just a maid, because it fit your narrow worldview. I never claimed to work for you. I never said I was employed by someone else. You created an entire fantasy about our relationship based on nothing but your own prejudices. She walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a thick folder that had been sitting there all along, hidden in plain sight among the household paperwork. Your lease agreement, she said, opening the folder, clearly states that you are renting from Santos Real Estate Holding. It includes my contact information, my business address, and a photograph for identification purposes. She held up a professional headshot of herself in a business suit. You never bothered to look at any of it. Bradley's legs seemed to give out, and he sank heavily onto the nearest chair. The lease, I thought it was just paperwork. You never read a document before signing it. Marcus spoke up, his professional instincts overriding his personal embarrassment. Bradley, that's incredibly irresponsible. Maria turned her attention to Marcus. Speaking of irresponsible, counselor, your firm's lease renewal is due next month. The rent increase I was considering has just become significantly more attractive, given today's conversation. Marcus visibly winced. Miss Santos, we had no idea who you were. If we had known, you would have treated me differently, Maria interrupted. You would have shown basic human respect only if you knew I had money and power. The question hung in the air like an accusation, because that's exactly what they all would have done, and they knew. Danny finally looked up from his phone, his face ashen. The bank, you really own the credit union? 43% controlling interest, Maria confirmed, which means I have access to account activity report. Your cryptocurrency fortune consists of exactly $8047 in Bitcoin and a lot of screenshots of other people's trades that you've been passing off as your own. Danny slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. Trevor cleared his throat nervously. Miss Santos, about my office leave, I want you to know that I've always paid on time, and you've been 30 days late 4 times this year, Maria said without even looking at him. But you're right about one thing. You do pay. Eventually, which is more than I can say for some people. She turned back to Bradley, who was still staring at the lease documents in shock. Here's what's going to happen, Maria announced, her voice taking on the tone of a commanding officer issuing order. Trevor, you're going to leave now. Drive carefully, and when you get home, you're going to write a letter of apology for your behavior today. Danny, you're going to do the same. And you're also going to stop lying about your financial status to potential investors. Marcus, your firm will receive a formal notice about rent increases, but they'll be reasonable if your behavior improves. All 3 men nodded eagerly, desperate to escape the situation with their dignity and livelihoods intact. And Bradley, Maria continued, her attention focusing on the man who had started it all. You have a choice to make. Bradley looked up at her with desperate hope in his eye. You can sincerely apologize for 3 years of disrespectful treatment, commit to fundamentally changing your attitude and behavior, and continue living here under a revised lease agreement with significantly higher rent and strict behavioral clauses, Maria said, or you can pack your belongings and be out by the end of the month. Bradley's mouth worked silently for a moment before words finally came out. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Miss Santos. I had no idea. I mean, I shouldn't have treated you that way regardless of who you were. But you did treat me that way, Maria interrupted. For 3 years, every day, you treated me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter, like I was beneath your notice. Do you think that kind of ingrained disrespect just disappears because you've been caught? The room was silent except for the sound of Bradley's labored breathing. However, Maria continued, I believe in second chance. I've seen people change when they truly understand the consequences of their actions, so here's what's going to happen. She pulled out a new document from her folder. New lease agreement, market rate rent, $8,200 per month, no more subsidized housing, behavioral clauses that require respectful treatment of all building staff and residents. Violation of these clauses results in immediate eviction, and you'll be working with a property management company that specializes in difficult tenants. Bradley's face went through several expressions as he processed the financial reality. $8,000 a month was more than half his take-home pay. I can't afford that, he whispered. Then I suggest you figure out how to afford it, Maria replied without sympathy. Get a roommate, find a second job, ask your parents for help. That's what most people your age do when they want to live beyond their means. She walked over to where his friends were sitting, and looked at each of them in turn. Gentlemen, your presence is no longer welcome in my building. I suggest you leave now, and I strongly advise you to think carefully about how you treat service workers in the future. You never know who's really in charge. Trevor, Danny, and Marcus practically ran for the door, grabbing their coats and mumbling apologies as they fled. The sound of the elevator doors closing echoed through the penthouse like a final judgment. Maria turned back to Bradley, who was still holding the new lease agreement with shaking hands. You have 24 hours to decide, she said calmly. Sign the new lease, and commit to being a respectful tenant, or start packing. Either way, Master Sergeant Maria Santos is done being your maid. As she walked back toward the kitchen to resume her work that she now performed by choice rather than obligation, Maria felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. Bradley Whitman had learned that day that respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you earn, and some lessons are more expensive than others. The penthouse was quiet now, filled only with the sound of Bradley reading his new lease agreement, and the gentle clinking of Maria cleaning up the shattered remains of Trevor's whiskey glass. It was, she thought, the sound of a proper power dynamic finally being restored. The morning light filtered through the same floor-to-ceiling windows of the Seattle penthouse, but everything else had changed. Maria Santos sat at the marble kitchen island, reviewing property reports over her morning coffee, a ritual she now performed openly rather than hidden away in a back room. She wore a crisp business suit instead of a uniform, and her laptop displayed the Seattle Times real estate section where her latest acquisition had made headlines. The headline read, "Local Veterans Real Estate Empire Continues to Grow. Santos Holdings Acquires Historic Downtown Building." At exactly 7:30 a.m., the elevator chimed, and Bradley Whitman entered the penthouse carrying 2 cups of coffee from the expensive cafe downstairs. He moved quietly, respectfully, setting 1 cup beside Maria's laptop before retreating to prepare for his day. "Thank you, Bradley," Maria said without looking up from her screen. "You're welcome, Miss Santos," he replied, his voice carrying none of the arrogance that had once defined him. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Within 48 hours of their confrontation, Bradley had signed the new lease agreement, and immediately begun the humbling process of learning to live within his actual means. The $8,200 monthly rent had forced him to make dramatic changes. He'd moved his girlfriend out, taken a weekend job delivering groceries, and started eating breakfast at home instead of spending $15 an artisanal toast at trendy cafe. More importantly, he'd begun treating Maria, and everyone else in the service industry with genuine respect, not the performative politeness of someone who knew they were being watched, but the authentic courtesy of someone who had learned a fundamental lesson about human dignity. Maria's phone buzzed with a text message from Trevor Morrison. Over the past 3 months, the real estate broker had sent weekly updates about his business, always including an apology for his behavior and a request to handle any properties Maria might be looking to sell. His desperation was palpable, but his newfound humility was genuine. "Miss Santos," the text read, "I wanted to update you on the Lake Union property showing. The clients were very interested, and mentioned your reputation for fair dealing. I hope this demonstrates my commitment to representing your properties with the respect they deserve. Trevor." Maria smiled slightly. Trevor's business had initially suffered when word spread about his behavior at the penthouse. Seattle's real estate community was smaller than people realized, and Maria's influence was larger. But as he genuinely worked to change his approach, treating all clients with equal respect regardless of their apparent wealth, his reputation had slowly begun to recover. Danny Kim's story had been less successful. His lies about cryptocurrency wealth had caught up with him. When actual investors discovered his deception, the blog he'd been writing about financial independence had been exposed as fiction, and he'd been forced to move back in with his parents in Tacoma. However, according to Maria's sources at the credit union, he'd recently opened a modest savings account and was working at a local electronics store, apparently learning the value of honest work. Marcus Webb's law firm had received their rent increase notice, along with a detailed explanation of their new landlord's expectations for professional conduct from all tenants. The firm had initially considered moving, but when they discovered that Maria owned 3 of the 4 buildings they'd considered as alternatives, they'd decided to accept the new term. Marcus himself had sent a formal letter of apology, and had reportedly become something of a champion for respectful treatment of support staff within his firm. But the most interesting development had been completely unexpected. Maria heard the sound of the front door opening, and looked up to see Elena Rodriguez, a young Latina woman in her early 20s, entering with a professional tablet and a warm smile. Elena was Maria's new assistant, a recent college graduate with a degree in business administration, who helped manage the growing real estate portfolio. "Good morning, Miss Santos," Elena said brightly. "I have the reports from the Belltown property inspection, and the contractors are ready to start the accessibility renovations you requested." "Excellent," Maria replied, accepting the tablet and the scholarship applications. 15 new applications this week, Elena reported proudly, all from veterans transitioning to civilian careers in real estate and property management. The Santos Foundation for Veteran Entrepreneurship had been Maria's response to the success of her real estate business. She'd realized that her story transitioning from military service to business ownership could be replicated by other veterans who had the discipline and strategic thinking but lacked the initial capital or guide. Bradley, who had been listening to the conversation while preparing his breakfast, cleared his throat softly. "Miss Santos, if I may, I'd like to make a contribution to the foundation." Maria looked up, genuinely surprised. Bradley's financial situation was still tight, and she knew every dollar mattered to him now. "It's not much," he continued, pulling out an envelope. $500 from my weekend job. I know it's small compared to what you're probably used to, but I wanted to contribute to helping other veterans. Especially after learning about everything you've accomplished." Maria accepted the envelope, but more importantly, she saw something in Bradley's eyes that hadn't been there 3 months ago. Genuine respect and understanding. "This means more than you know, Bradley," she said, not because of the amount, but because of what it represents. Elena smiled as she watched the interaction. She'd heard the story of Bradley's transformation from Maria, and seeing it in person was remarkable. The arrogant tech executive who had dismissed Maria as just a maid was now volunteering his limited free time to help her foundation's marketing efforts, using his technology skills to build a better website for veteran applicants. As Bradley left for his day job, Maria turned to Elena. "What's on the schedule for today?" "Property walkthrough at 10 a.m. for the new affordable housing project," Elena said, consulting her tablet. "Lunch meeting with the mayor's office about the veteran housing initiative. And at 3 p.m., you have that interview with Seattle Business Journal about transitioning from military service to entrepreneurship." Maria nodded, gathering her papers. As she prepared to leave for her first appointment, she paused at the window overlooking the city. 3 months ago, she'd been invisible in this same penthouse, dismissed and disrespected by people who judged her worth by her appearance and assumptions about her background. Now she was one of Seattle's most influential property developers, a recognized advocate for veteran rights, and a business leader whose story was inspiring others across the country. But more than that, she'd created real change in the lives of people around her. Trevor was learning to treat all clients with dignity. Marcus was advocating for respectful workplace policies. Danny was discovering the satisfaction of honest work, and Bradley had transformed from an entitled tenant into a genuine ally for veteran cause. As she walked toward the elevator, Elena fell into step beside her. "Ms. Santos, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever miss it? The anonymity, being able to observe people without them knowing who you really were?" Maria considered the question as the elevator descended toward the lobby. "Sometimes," she said finally. "There was something valuable about seeing people's true character when they thought I didn't matter, but I don't miss being invisible. I don't miss being dismissed or disrespected." The elevator doors opened to reveal the building's lobby, where the doorman, an older veteran named Frank, greeted Maria with genuine warmth and respect. "Good morning, Miss Santos. Your car is waiting." "Thank you, Frank. How's your son doing with his college application?" "Very well, thanks to the recommendation letter you wrote. I can't thank you enough." As they walked toward the waiting car, Elena reflected on the lesson she'd learned from watching Maria navigate her business and personal relationships. Real power wasn't about hiding or pretending to be something you weren't. Real power was about lifting others up, creating opportunities, and earning respect through actions, rather than demanding it through position. The story of the maid, who owned everything, had become legendary in Seattle's business community, but the real story was about what happened next, how one woman's experience with disrespect had transformed into a mission to ensure others never felt invisible or dismissed again. And that story was still being written, one respectful interaction at a time. 1 year later, the auditorium at the University of Washington was packed beyond capacity, with people standing in the aisles and others watching on screens in overflow rooms. The annual Veterans Business Summit had grown from a small local gathering to a nationally recognized conference, and this year's keynote speaker had drawn the largest crowd in the event's history. Maria Santos stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that included hundreds of veterans, business leaders, and students. The simple navy blue suit she wore was elegant but understated, a far cry from the uniform she'd once worn while being dismissed as just a maid. "When I retired from the Marine Corps," Maria began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, "I thought my mission was over. I thought my days of serving something bigger than myself were behind me. I was wrong. In the front row, Bradley Whitman sat with his notebook open, frantically taking notes. He'd become one of the foundation's most dedicated volunteers, using his technology background to help veteran entrepreneurs build their online presence. Beside him sat Elena Rodriguez, now the foundation's director of operations, and Frank Morrison, the former doorman who'd become Maria's director of veteran outreach after earning his real estate license with the foundation's support. The business world told me that to succeed, I needed to be aggressive, demanding, visible. Maria continued. But my most valuable education came from a period when I was invisible. When people thought I didn't matter, they showed me who they really were. In the middle section of the auditorium, Trevor Morrison listened intently. His real estate business had not only recovered, but thrived after he'd completely changed his approach to client service. He now ran sensitivity training workshops for other real estate professionals, teaching them that every client deserved respect regardless of their apparent wealth or background. I learned that true power isn't about demanding respect, it's about creating environments where respect is the standard. Maria said, "It's about building systems that lift people up rather than tear them down." The audience murmured in agreement, many nodding their heads. Among them was Doc Jennifer Walsh, a business professor who had been studying Maria's story as part of her research on leadership and social transformation. She'd interviewed dozens of people whose lives had been touched by Maria's work, documenting how one person's courage to stand up for dignity had created ripple effects throughout an entire community. Marcus Webb was also in attendance, though he sat toward the back of the auditorium. His law firm had become one of the foundation's pro bono legal partners, providing free services to veteran entrepreneurs. Marcus himself had left his old firm to start a practice focused on helping small business owners and nonprofits. A career change that had cost him money, but given him a sense of purpose he'd never experienced in corporate law. The Santos Foundation has now helped over 200 veterans start their own businesses, Maria announced, causing applause to ripple through the crowd. But the real success isn't measured in dollars earned or companies started. It's measured in dignity restored and respect earned. On the large screens flanking the stage, a video began playing, showing testimonials from foundation beneficiaries. James Patterson, a former Army medic, spoke about how the foundation's microloan program had helped him open a medical equipment repair business. Sarah Kim, a Navy veteran, described how the mentorship program had given her the confidence to start a cybersecurity consulting firm. But the most powerful testimonial came from an unexpected source. "My name is Danny Kim," the video showed him saying from what appeared to be a small but well-organized office. "A year and a half ago, I was a fraud. I was lying about my financial success, disrespecting service workers, and judging people based on superficial characteristics." The audience watched in fascination as Danny continued. "I lost everything when my lies were exposed. But Ms. Santos didn't just destroy my false life, she showed me what a real life could look like. I now run a small but honest financial counseling service for young adults, teaching them the lessons I had to learn the hard way." Maria smiled as she watched the video from the stage. Danny's transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic of all. After hitting rock bottom, he'd slowly rebuilt his life based on honesty and genuine service to others. His financial counseling business was small but growing, and his clients loved his authentic approach to money management. The story of the maid who owned everything has been told and retold across the country, Maria said, as the video ended. But that was never the real story. The real story is about what happens when we choose to see the humanity in every person we encounter. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Every day, each of us has the opportunity to lift someone up, or tear them down, to see people as human beings worthy of respect, or as obstacles to our own success, to use our power to create positive change, or to maintain systems that keep others invisible. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her. "I spent 3 years being invisible, dismissed by people who judged my worth by my appearance and their assumptions about my background. But that experience taught me something invaluable. How you treat people when you think they don't matter reveals everything about who you really are." The applause was thunderous and sustained. People rose to their feet, many wiping tears from their eyes. In the front row, Bradley was crying openly, not from shame, but from gratitude for the second chance he'd been given and the person he'd been able to become. After the formal presentation, Maria mingled with attendees at the reception. She was approached by Dr. Amanda Stevens, a leadership consultant from Harvard Business School. "Miss Santos," Dr. Stevens said, "we'd like to invite you to speak at our executive leadership program. Your story has become a case study in our curriculum about authentic leadership and social responsibility." Maria smiled. "I'd be honored, but I have one condition." "Of course." Bradley Whitman comes with me as a co-presenter. His perspective on transformation and accountability is just as valuable as mine. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Maria found herself standing once again in front of floor-to-ceiling windows. This time, in the university's faculty lounge rather than her penthouse. Elena joined her, both women looking out at the Seattle skyline. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd never revealed who you really were?" Elena asked. Maria considered the question. "Sometimes, but I think the universe has a way of demanding that we step into our full power when we're ready. I couldn't stay invisible forever, not when I had the ability to create real change." The foundation has received over 1,000 applications for next year's program, Elena reported. "We're going to need more funding." "We'll find it," Maria said confidently. "When your mission is bigger than yourself, resources have a way of appearing." As they prepared to leave, Bradley approached them with a tablet in hand. "Miss Santos, I wanted to show you something. The live stream of your speech has been viewed over 50,000 times already, and the comments are incredible." He showed her the screen filled with messages from viewers around the country. "This made me think about how I treat service workers. Starting a foundation in my city for homeless veterans. Apologizing tomorrow to my housekeeper for my attitude. Teaching my kids about respect regardless of someone's job." Maria read through the messages, each one representing another ripple in the wave of change that had started with one moment of standing up for dignity. "You know what this means?" she said to Elena and Bradley. "What?" they asked in unison. "The mission is just beginning." As they walked toward the parking garage, Maria reflected on how far they'd all come. A year ago she'd been invisible, dismissed and disrespected. Now she was leading a movement that was changing how people thought about service, respect and human dignity. But the most satisfying part wasn't her own transformation. It was seeing Bradley become a genuine advocate for others, watching Elena grow into a powerful leader, and knowing that hundreds of veterans were building better lives because someone had finally seen them as worthy of respect. The story of the maid who owned everything had become legend, but the real story, the story of how standing up for dignity can transform entire communities, was still being written, one respectful interaction at a time. The boardroom on the 47th floor of Seattle's Columbia Center was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of the city, while the massive mahogany table could seat 20 people comfortably. But today, only 6 people sat around it, and the atmosphere was anything but comfortable. Maria Santos sat at one end of the table, flanked by Elena Rodriguez and the foundation's attorney Marcus Webb. Across from them sat 3 individuals who represented everything Maria had been fighting against: Victoria Blackstone, CEO of Blackstone Property Management; Richard Hampton, a city councilman known for his pro-business stance; Gerald Morrison, an economics professor whose recent op-ed had attacked veteran entrepreneurship programs as misguided charity. The meeting had been requested by Blackstone ostensibly to discuss concerns about market disruption caused by preferential lending practices. But Maria knew this was really about power, specifically her growing influence in Seattle's real estate market and the threat it posed to established players. "Miss Santos," Victoria began, her voice smooth and polished, "I want to start by saying we all admire what you've accomplished. Your personal story is quite inspiring." Maria remained silent, her years of military training having taught her to let opponents reveal their position before responding. However, Victoria continued, "We're concerned about the broader implications of your foundation's activity. These preferential loans to veterans, the below-market housing initiatives, They're creating unfair competitive advantages that distort the market. Elena shifted in her seat, but Maria placed a calming hand on her arm. She'd expected this challenge eventually. Success always bred opposition, especially when it threatened entrenched interests. Councilman Hampton leaned forward. The city has been fielding complaints from established business owners who feel they're being disadvantaged by these programs. We have to consider fairness to all constituents. Fairness, Maria repeated quietly. Tell me, Councilman Hampton, what's fair about a system that allows people like me to be invisible and dismissed for 3 years while others profit from that invisibility? Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. Ms. Santos, with respect, your personal experiences, while unfortunate, don't justify creating systemic advantages for one demographic group. The free market should determine success, not social engineering program. Maria looked at each of them in turn, recognizing the same attitudes she'd encountered in Bradley's penthouse 2 years ago. The belief that the current system was naturally fair, that their advantages were earned rather than inherited or systematically protected. Morrison, she said calmly, you've written extensively about market efficiency. Tell me, how efficient is a market that overlooks the talents and capabilities of entire demographic groups because of unconscious bias? That's not what happens, he began. Isn't it? Maria interrupted, pulling out a tablet. Elena, would you share our employment data? Elena stood and activated the room's presentation screen. Over the past 18 months, the Santos Foundation has tracked employment outcomes for our veteran entrepreneurs. The businesses we've helped start have created 1,027 jobs, generated $67 million in revenue, and contributed $8.3 million in local taxes. The numbers appeared on the screen, accompanied by charts showing growth trajectories and economic impact analyses. These veterans had the same skills and capabilities before our program existed. Maria continued. The only difference was access to capital and networks, access that was denied to them because lenders and investors couldn't see past their backgrounds to their potential. Victoria Blackstone's expression hardened. Ms. Santos, you're creating an unfair advantage by providing below-market loans and preferential treatment. Other business owners don't have access to these resources. Other business owners, Maria replied, have access to something my veterans don't. The assumption that they belong in business leadership roles. They have networks built through family connections, college fraternities, and social clubs. They have banks that see them as good risks based on demographics rather than capabilities. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline where dozens of her properties were visible. When I bought my first rental property, she continued, 3 banks turned me down despite my military pension, perfect credit score and substantial down payment. The loan officer at the 4th bank told me I should consider something more appropriate for someone like me. Marcus Webb had been taking notes throughout the meeting. Ms. Santos, he said, perhaps we should address the legal concerns they've raised. There are no valid legal concerns, Maria replied firmly. Every program we operate complies with federal and state regulation. We're a private foundation making private lending decisions, the same way banks have always made lending decisions, except we're making them based on merit rather than bias. Dr. Morrison tried a different approach. But don't you see the precedent this set? If every demographic group demands special programs, every demographic group already has special programs. Elena interjected, her voice sharp. They're called legacy admissions, country club memberships, family business succession, and old boy network. The difference is those programs are invisible to the people who benefit from them. Victoria leaned back in her chair, clearly frustrated that her reasonable tone wasn't having the desired effect. Ms. Santos, let's be direct. Your activities are disrupting established business relationships and property values in certain neighborhoods. People are concerned. Which people? Maria, property owners, established business leaders, people who've invested their life savings in real estate, based on predictable market conditions. Maria returned to her seat, her expression thoughtful. Victoria, you manage over 200 properties in Seattle. How many of your building superintendents, Maintenance workers and cleaning staff have you ever considered for management positions? That's not relevant to this discussion. It's exactly relevant. You have daily contact with people who understand property management intimately. People who know every pipe, every electrical system, every tenant issue in your building, but you've never seen them as potential business partners because they don't fit your image of what a property manager should look like. The room fell silent. Victoria's face had gone pale, clearly recognizing the truth in Maria's observation. The Santos Foundation, Maria continued, identifies talented individuals who've been overlooked by traditional systems. We provide them with the resources and support they need to succeed. If that disrupts your business model, perhaps the problem isn't with our programs, it's with your business model. Councilman Hampton shuffled through his papers. Ms. Santos, I think we can find some middle ground here. Perhaps some adjustments to your lending criteria. No, Maria said simply, there will be no adjustments to programs that are working perfectly. Our veterans have a 94% success rate, higher than traditional small business loans. Our housing initiatives have reduced veteran homelessness by 23% in King County. Our job training programs have a 97% placement rate. She gathered her materials and stood to leave. But we're prepared to make you an offer, she continued. The Santos Foundation will partner with any organization that demonstrates a genuine commitment to inclusive hiring and promotion practices. We'll provide consulting services to help you identify talent you've been overlooking. We'll share our screening and support methodology. Victoria, Hampton, and Morrison exchanged glances, clearly not having expected this response. The only requirement, Maria said, her hand on the door handle, is that you treat people with dignity regardless of their background, appearance, or current position, because you never know. The person you dismiss as just a janitor or just a secretary might be the next successful entrepreneur in this city. As they walked toward the elevator, Elena shook her head in amazement. They really thought they could intimidate you into scaling back the program. They're scared, Maria replied. And scared people make predictable moves. They try to use the same systems that gave them power to maintain that power. Marcus pressed the elevator button. What do you think they'll do next? Maria smiled as the elevator doors opened. They'll realize that fighting us is more expensive than joining us. Within 6 months, Victoria will be advertising her veteran-friendly property management services. Hampton will be sponsoring veteran business legislation. Morrison will be writing papers about the economic benefits of inclusive lending. How can you be so sure? Elena asked. Because, Maria said as they descended toward the lobby, I learned a long time ago that the best way to defeat opposition isn't to fight it. It's to make joining you more profitable than fighting you. As they exited the building into the Seattle sunshine, Maria felt the familiar satisfaction of a mission accomplished. The foundation's work would continue. Opposition would be converted into alliance, and more veterans would get the opportunities they deserve. After all, Master Sergeant Maria Santos had faced much tougher opponents than a few scared business leaders protecting their status quo, and she'd never lost a battle yet. 6 months later, the Seattle Times headline dominated the front page of the business section. Opposition becomes alliance. Blackstone Property Management partners with Santos Foundation for largest veteran housing initiative in state history. Below it, a photograph showed Victoria Blackstone and Maria Santos shaking hands in front of a newly constructed affordable housing complex, both women smiling genuinely. Maria sat in her office at the Santos Foundation headquarters, a converted warehouse in the Georgetown district that had been transformed into a modern workspace, while preserving its industrial character. Through the large windows, she could see the construction site of their latest project, a 200-unit, mixed-income development that would provide housing for veterans and their families. Elena Rodriguez, now the foundation's executive director, knocked on the doorframe before entering. Maria's, the city council meeting starts in an hour. Are you ready for Councilman Hampton's announcement? Maria smiled, remembering her prediction 6 months earlier. I'm curious to see how he phrases his sudden discovery of the benefits of veteran entrepreneurship. Elena laughed as she settled into the chair across from Maria's desk. Dr. Morrison's latest paper is being published next week in the Journal of Economic Policy. The title is Inclusive Lending Practices, a Model for Sustainable Economic Growth. He's requesting an interview to discuss how his research supports expanding veteran business programs. Right on schedule, Maria said, not bothering to hide her satisfaction. The transformation of her former opponents had been even more dramatic than she'd anticipated. The intercom buzzed, and the receptionist voice came through clearly. Miss Santos, Bradley Whitman is here for your 2 o'clock meeting. Send him in, Maria replied. Bradley entered the office carrying a thick portfolio and wearing a smile that transformed his entire appearance. The arrogant, tech executive who had once dismissed Maria as just a maid had evolved into one of the foundation's most valuable assets. His technology consulting firm, specializing in helping veteran-owned businesses establish their digital presence, had become so successful that he'd been able to move out of the penthouse into his own home. Maria, you're not going to believe this, he said, his excitement palpable. We just got approval for the digital literacy program at Joint Base Lewis McChord. 200 transitioning service members will go through our tech training pipeline over the next year. Elena leaned forward with interest. That's incredible, Bradley. How did you convince the base commander? Bradley's expression grew serious. I told him my story, about how I lived in your penthouse for 3 years without knowing who you really were, about how my prejudices and assumptions nearly cost me everything, about how you gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. He opened his portfolio and pulled out a letter on official military letterhead. The commander said he'd been looking for a program that would help veterans understand how to navigate civilian professional environment. Our curriculum doesn't just teach technology skills, it teaches respect, cultural competency, and professional communication. Maria accepted the letter, scanning its contents with growing amazement. The military was notoriously slow to adopt new programs, especially from civilian organizations. The fact that they'd approved such a comprehensive partnership spoke to the Foundation's growing reputation and credibility. There's more, Bradley continued. Microsoft wants to sponsor the program. They're providing laptops, software licenses, and internship opportunities for graduates. But the best part is what they said about why they're partnering with us. He pulled out another document, a press release draft from Microsoft's corporate communications team. The Santos Foundation represents the kind of transformative leadership that creates sustainable change. Maria read aloud. Their approach to veteran empowerment, through dignity and respect, aligns perfectly with our corporate values of inclusive innovation. Elena shook her head and wondered. 2 years ago you were invisible in a penthouse, being dismissed as help. Now Microsoft is citing your leadership philosophy in their press releases. Before Maria could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Trevor Morrison, realist. Maria, it's Trevor, came the familiar voice through the speaker. I just closed the sale on the East Side property for the Veterans Family Housing Project. The buyer is paying full asking price and wants to fast-track closing to support the program. That's excellent news, Trevor. Who's the buyer? You're going to love this, Trevor said, his voice containing barely suppressed laughter. Blackstone Property Management. Victoria called me personally to handle the transaction, she said, and I quote, I want to make sure this sale goes smoothly because the Santos Foundation's work is too important to delay. Maria exchanged glances with Elena and Bradley, all three of them smiling at the complete transformation of their former opposition. She also asked me to set up a meeting, Trevor continued. She wants to discuss having Blackstone become the official property management partner for all Santos Foundation housing projects. She's even proposing to hire 3 of our veteran graduates as regional manager. After ending the call, Maria walked to the window overlooking the construction site. 2 years ago she'd been standing in a penthouse kitchen, listening to people discuss her as if she were invisible. Today those same people were actively supporting her mission and implementing the values she'd tried to teach them. You know what the most satisfying part is? She said to Elena and Bradley. What? They asked in unison. They didn't change because I forced them to. They changed because treating people with dignity and respect turned out to be more profitable and fulfilling than their old way of doing business. Bradley nodded thoughtfully. Victoria told me last week that her employee retention is up 40% since she started promoting from within and treating all staff as potential leaders. She said the maintenance workers and cleaning staff have some of the best insights about property management she's ever heard. Elena pulled up some data on her tablet. The companies that have partnered with us are consistently outperforming their competitors. Our veteran entrepreneurs have a 94% success rate, but the businesses that employ our graduates have seen productivity increases of 23%. It turns out, Maria said, that when you treat people with respect and give them opportunities to grow, they perform better. When you create inclusive environments, you get better results. When you judge people by their capabilities rather than their appearance, you make better business decisions. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Maria's assistant entered with a large envelope marked Urgent City of Seattle. "This just arrived by courier," she said, handing the envelope to Maria. Maria opened it to find an official proclamation from the mayor's office. Along with a personal letter, she read the proclamation aloud, where the Santos Foundation for Veteran Entrepreneurship has created measurable positive impact on employment, housing and economic development in the city of Seattle, and where Master Sergeant Maria Santos has demonstrated exceptional leadership in creating inclusive business practices that benefit all citizens. Now, therefore, I, Mayor's name, do hereby proclaim October 15th as Santos Foundation Appreciation Day, recognizing the transformative power of dignity, respect, and opportunity. The personal letter from the mayor was even more remarkable. Miss Santos, your story has become legendary in our city, but more importantly, your work has become a model for other cities across the country. The mayor's office has received inquiries from over 30 cities, wanting to replicate your programs. You've proven that social justice and economic prosperity aren't competing interests. They're complementary strategies for building stronger communities. Elena wiped tears from her eye. From Invisible Maid to having a City Appreciation Day in 2 years, that's incredible. Bradley stood up, his expression serious. Maria, I need to say something. I know I've apologized before, but I want you to understand something. You didn't just change my life. You saved it. I was becoming a person I wouldn't have been able to live with. You showed me that real success isn't about what you can take from people. It's about what you can give to them. Maria looked at Bradley, truly looked at him, and saw not the arrogant man who had once dismissed her, but someone who had genuinely transformed into a force for positive change. Bradley, she said quietly, that's the most important lesson any of us can learn. And the fact that you learned it means there's hope for everyone. As the afternoon sun streamed through the office windows, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment, from a gas station confrontation that inspired her story structure, to a penthouse revelation that changed multiple lives, to a foundation that was now changing an entire city's approach to opportunity and respect. The girl from East LA, who had become a Marine, then a successful businesswoman, then an advocate for dignity and respect, had achieved something she'd never imagined. She'd helped create a world where no one had to be invisible, where everyone's potential could be recognized and nurtured. And the best part was, this was still just the beginning. 2 years later, the familiar ding of the elevator echoed through the marble lobby of Seattle's most exclusive residential tower. Maria Santos stepped out onto the penthouse floor, but this time she wasn't carrying cleaning supplies or wearing a uniform. She wore an elegant charcoal gray suit and carried a leather portfolio containing the building's purchase agreement. She had just acquired the entire 47-story tower for her expanding real estate portfolio. The penthouse door stood open, revealing the same floor-to-ceiling windows and Italian marble countertops where her transformation had begun 4 years earlier. But now the space was empty, staged for showing to potential buyers who wanted to own a piece of Seattle history. Elena Rodriguez emerged from the kitchen area, tablet in hand, followed by Frank Morrison, the former doorman, who now served as the foundation's director of property development. Both were conducting a final walkthrough before the penthouse's conversion into the building's new community center and veteran resource hub. The contractor confirmed the timeline, Elena reported. 8 weeks to convert this space into offices, meeting rooms, and a digital training center. Bradley's team has already designed the technology infrastructure. Maria walked slowly through the living area where Bradley had once held court with his friends, dismissing her as invisible help. The irony wasn't lost on her that this same space would soon serve hundreds of veterans seeking the dignity and opportunity she'd been denied here. Santos, Frank said, his voice carrying the respect that had replaced his former tentative politeness. There's someone here who'd like to speak with you. He gestured toward the entrance, where a young Latina woman in military dress uniform stood at attention. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to discipline and responsibility. Ma'am, Staff Sergeant Carmen Vasquez, United States Army, the young woman said, stepping forward with precise military movement. I'm transitioning out of service next month and I wanted to meet you before I applied to your program. Maria smiled warmly, immediately recognizing something familiar in Carmen's eyes, the same mixture of determination and uncertainty she'd felt during her own transition to civilian life. At ease, Sergeant, Maria said gently, tell me about your background. Carmen relaxed slightly but maintained her professional posture. 3 tours in Afghanistan, ma'am, military intelligence specialist. I've been working on my business degree through the Army's education program, and I want to start a cybersecurity consulting firm for small businesses. Excellent goals, Maria replied. What made you seek out our program specifically? Carmen's expression grew more personal. My grandmother worked as a housekeeper for 30 years, ma'am. She cleaned houses for families who never bothered to learn her name. When I heard your story about how you were invisible for 3 years while actually owning everything, it reminded me of. Maria felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The connection between her experience and the broader pattern of invisible service workers wasn't something she'd expected to resonate so powerfully with the next generation of veterans. She died last year, Carmen continued, her voice steady but emotional. Cancer. The family she worked for the longest sent flowers to the funeral, but they spelled her name wrong on the card. After 40 years of cleaning their house, they still didn't know her name was Esperanza, not Esperanza. Elena and Frank exchanged glances, both clearly moved by the young sergeant's story. Your foundation isn't just about business loans and mentorship, Carmen said. It's about making sure people like my grandmother, like you were in this apartment, never have to be invisible again. Maria nodded slowly. What would your grandmother think about your plans to start a business? For the first time, Carmen's military composure cracked slightly, and she smiled. She'd say I was loca for thinking I could be the boss instead of just working for one. But she'd also say that if I was going to be crazy, I should be crazy enough to succeed. Smart woman, Maria said. I think she'd be proud of the sergeant standing in front of me today. As they talked, Bradley Whitman arrived with his laptop bag and a familiar coffee carrier. The same man who had once demanded that the maid stay invisible now brought coffee for the team meetings. A gesture that spoke to how completely his understanding of service had evolved. Maria, he said, setting down the coffee, I wanted to update you on the digital training program. We've had requests from bases in 15 states to replicate what we're doing here. The Army is considering making it part of their standard transition curriculum. He noticed Carmen's uniform and extended his hand respectfully. Bradley Whitman, I coordinate the Foundation's technology program. Staff Sergeant Carmen Vasquez, she replied, shaking his hand firmly. Sergeant, if you're interested in cybersecurity, you should know that 3 of our veteran graduates have started successful cybersecurity firms in the past year. The market demand is incredible, and your military intelligence background gives you a significant advantage. Maria watched the interaction with satisfaction. The man who had once spoken about people knowing their place was now genuinely encouraging a young veteran to reach for her full potential. Marcus Webb entered the penthouse carrying a thick folder of legal documents. Maria, I have the final papers for the building conversion. The city fast-tracked all the permits after the mayor's office intervened. Apparently, Converting luxury housing into veteran services is considered a public benefit. He noticed Carmen and approached with the same respectful demeanor Bradley had shown. Marcus Webb, Foundation Legal Counsel. Are you considering our entrepreneurship program? Yes, sir, Carmen replied. Cybersecurity consulting. Excellent field, Marcus said. Enthusiastically, I can connect you with some potential clients. My firm represents several small businesses that desperately need cybersecurity services, but can't afford the big consulting companies. Maria realized she was witnessing something remarkable. 4 years ago, in this same space, she'd been dismissed and disrespected by men who saw her as beneath their notice. Now, those same men were actively working to ensure that veterans like Carmen would never experience that invisibility. Sergeant Vasquez, Maria said, I'd like to offer you something beyond our standard program. Carmen straightened to attention. Ma'am, I want you to shadow Elena for the next month before you officially transition out of service. Learn how we operate, understand our approach, and help us design programs specifically for female veterans transitioning into business ownership. Elena's eyes lit up. That's brilliant, Marie. We've been getting more applications from women veterans, but we could definitely improve our support systems for the unique challenges they face. Carmen looked stunned. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Maria replied with a smile. And stop calling me. We're going to be colleagues. As the group continued their discussion, Maria found herself standing in the exact spot where Bradley had once confronted her, where he'd told her she was just the help and needed to know her place. The memory felt like something from another lifetime, not because the pain had faded, but because the transformation that had followed was so complete. Trevor Morrison arrived as the sun began to set, the golden light streaming through the windows creating the same beautiful atmosphere. Maria remembered from her first day in this space. Sorry I'm late, Trevor said, slightly out of breath. I was showing the veteran housing complex to a reporter from Forbes. They're doing a feature story on how dignity-based business practices are outperforming traditional models. He looked around the empty penthouse with a mixture of awe and regret. Every time I'm in this space, I think about that day 4 years ago. About how wrong we were, how blind we were. Carmen looked confused. What happened 4 years ago? Bradley, Elena, Frank, Marcus, and Trevor all looked at Maria, waiting to see how she'd explain the origin story that had become legendary in Seattle's business community. Maria walked to the kitchen area where she'd once stood while being discussed as if she were invisible. Sergeant, 4 years ago, I worked as the housekeeper in this penthouse. The tenant and his friends treated me as if I didn't exist, never knowing that I actually owned this entire building. Carmen's eyes widened. This is where it happened? Where you revealed who you really were? This is where it started, Maria corrected. The revelation was just the beginning. The real work was everything that came after. Building a foundation, changing minds, creating opportunities for people like you. She gestured around the space that would soon be transformed into a hub for veteran empowerment. And now this penthouse, where I was once invisible, will become a place where no veteran ever has to feel invisible again. As the group prepared to leave, Carmen lingered by the windows, looking out at the Seattle skyline where dozens of Santos Foundation projects were visible in the distance. Santos, she said quietly, do you think your story will inspire other people to stand up when they're being dismissed or disrespected? Maria joined her at the window, both women looking out at the city that had been transformed by one person's decision to stop accepting invisibility. I hope so, Sergeant. But more than that, I hope it inspires people to see the potential in everyone they encounter. Because you never know, the person you're dismissing as just a maid or just a janitor might be the next business leader, community advocate, or change agent your city needs. As they walked toward the elevator for the last time, Maria felt the profound satisfaction of a mission truly accomplished. The penthouse would never again be a place where anyone was made to feel invisible. Instead, it would be a beacon of possibility, dignity, and respect, a physical reminder that true power comes not from demanding service, but from empowering others to serve their highest potential. The circle was complete, but the impact would continue for generations to come. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, jolting Maria Santos awake in her modest Queen Anne apartment. Despite her substantial wealth, she'd chosen to live simply, reserving most of her resources for the foundation's work. The caller ID showed an international number with a country code she didn't immediately recognize. "Ms. Santos." The voice carried a crisp British accent. "This is Amanda Richardson calling from the office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. I apologize for the early hour, but we're calling from Geneva, and this matter is quite urgent." Maria sat up in bed, instantly alert. In her military days, early morning calls usually meant something significant was happening. "I'm listening," Maria replied, reaching for the notepad she kept on her nightstand, a habit from her Marine Corps days. "Ms. Santos, your work with veteran reintegration has come to our attention through multiple channels. We've been monitoring the success rates of your programs, and frankly, they're unprecedented. We have a situation that requires someone with your expertise." Amanda paused, and Maria could hear papers rustling in the background. "There are currently 2.3 million refugees worldwide who are former military personnel, men and women who served their countries honorably, but now find themselves displaced, often invisible to the very societies they once protected. Traditional refugee resettlement programs haven't been effective with this population because they don't address the unique challenges military veterans face." Maria was fully awake now, her strategic mind already processing the implications. "What exactly are you proposing?" "The UN wants to pilot an international version of your program. We're looking at starting in 3 countries: Germany, which has a large Syrian refugee population, including former military; Canada, which has committed to accepting 10,000 Afghan veterans and their families; and Australia, which is dealing with refugee veterans from various Southeast Asian conflicts." The magnitude of what Amanda was suggesting began to sink in. Maria had built her foundation to serve veterans in one city, then expanded across the United States. But this was something entirely different. A global humanitarian effort. "Ms. Santos, are you still there?" "I'm here," Maria replied. "I'm just processing the scope of what you're describing. This isn't just about business loans and job training. These are people who've lost everything: their countries, their identities, their sense of purpose." "Exactly," Amanda said, her voice carrying both urgency and hope. "And based on our research, you're the only person who's successfully created a reintegration model that addresses dignity, respect, and economic empowerment simultaneously. Your approach of seeing potential rather than deficits, of treating people as assets rather than problems, that's what these veteran refugees need." Maria walked to her window overlooking Elliott Bay, watching the early morning ferry traffic, the same waters she'd contemplated during her own difficult transition from military to civilian life. What would this partnership look like practically? "We're prepared to fund a pilot program with an initial budget of $50 million, Amanda said. "The goal would be to establish Santos Foundation methodologies in the 3 target countries, with local adaptations for cultural differences. You'd have complete autonomy over program design and implementation." $50 million. Maria had built her entire foundation on much less, but the scale of serving refugee veterans across multiple countries would require resources she'd never imagined needing. "There's more," Amanda continued. "The European Union has expressed interest in expanding this to all member nations if the pilot succeeds, and the World Bank is considering incorporating your dignity-based economic development model into their global poverty reduction strategies." Maria's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Elena Rodriguez. "Amanda, I need to call you back. Can I have a direct number?" After exchanging contact information, Maria immediately called Elena. "Maria, thank God you're awake." Elena's voice was excited and slightly breathless. "I've been getting calls since the United Nations story leaked to the press. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. Everyone wants to interview you about the international expansion." Maria felt a familiar mix of anticipation and responsibility. How did it leak? "Someone at the UN apparently told a journalist about the $50 million pilot program. The story is that the Maid, who became a business empire founder, is now being recruited to solve the global refugee crisis. That's not exactly accurate, I know, but that's how the media is framing it. There's more, Maria. I've gotten 15 calls from other countries asking if we're accepting international applications. Veterans from the UK, Ireland, New Zealand, even some from South Korea and Japan. Maria's mind raced through the implications. The foundation had grown organically, carefully, building trust and relationships within communities they understood. International expansion would require navigating different cultures, languages, legal systems, and economic structure. Elena, I need you to set up an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. We need Bradley, Marcus, Frank, and I want Carmen Vasquez there too. Her perspective as someone just transitioning out of service will be valuable. Already done. Everyone can be here by Maria, there's something else. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Harvard called. She said the business school wants to create a case study about international scaling of social enterprise. And get this, Victoria Blackstone called personally to offer Blackstone's International Property Management Network to support housing for refugee veterans. The irony wasn't lost on Maria. The woman who had once opposed her programs as market disruption was now volunteering her company's resources to support global expansion. By 8 a.m., Maria's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Trevor Morrison called to report that the Seattle mayor's office wanted to host an international summit on veteran reintegration. Bradley Whitman texted that Microsoft was offering technology infrastructure support for global operations. Even Gerald Morrison, the economics professor who had initially criticized the foundation, left a voicemail, offering to conduct research on international implementation strategies. But the call that mattered most came at 8. Santos, this is General Patricia Hayes, Commanding General of Fort Lewis. I'm calling on behalf of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Maria straightened automatically at the mention of such high-ranking military leadership. General Hayes, how can I help you? Ms. Santos, we've been following your work for some time. The success rates you've achieved with veteran transition are remarkable, and frankly they're better than our own military transition programs. We'd like to propose a partnership. What kind of partnership? The Department of Defense wants to incorporate your methodologies into our standard transition assistance programs, but more than that, we want to support your international work. We have relationships with allied militaries around the world, and many of them are dealing with veteran reintegration challenges. Maria felt the weight of recognition from the very institution she'd served for over 2 decades. General, I'm honored by the confidence the military is showing in our work. Ms. Santos, you've proven that treating veterans with dignity and respect while providing practical support creates better outcomes than traditional bureaucratic approaches. The Joint Chiefs believe your model could benefit not just refugee veterans, but all transitioning service members globally. After the call ended, Maria sat in her kitchen with her morning coffee, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. 4.5 years ago, she'd been invisible in a penthouse, dismissed as just a maid. Today, the United Nations, multiple governments, and the US military were asking for her help to address global challenges. But more than the recognition or the resources being offered, what struck her was the opportunity to ensure that no veteran, regardless of their country of origin or circumstances, would ever have to feel invisible or dismissed again. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carmen Vasquez. Ms. Santos, I've been following the news this morning. Whatever you decide about the international program, I want you to know that you've already changed the world for people like me, but if you're going global, I'd be honored to help. Maria smiled, remembering her own transition from military service and the isolation she'd felt. Carmen represented not just the next generation of veteran leaders, but the global community of service members, who deserve dignity and opportunity regardless of where they'd served or where they now called home. The local mission had become national. The national mission was about to become global, and Master Sergeant Maria Santos was ready to serve on the largest stage of her life. The refugee camp on the outskirts of Berlin was nothing like the conference rooms and boardrooms where Maria Santos had grown accustomed to conducting business. Rows of temporary housing stretched across a muddy field, home to over 3,000 refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and other conflict zones. The November air was bitter cold, and the faces of the people she passed carried the exhaustion of those who had lost everything. Maria walked alongside Klaus Weber, the German Ministry of Integration's liaison for the Santos Foundation pilot program. Behind them, Elena Rodriguez and Carmen Vasquez documented everything they saw, taking notes on the challenges they'd need to address in implementing their veteran reintegration model in such different circumstances, Weber said, introducing them to a Syrian woman in her early 30s, former captain in the Syrian Army Medical Corps. She's been here for 18 months. Amara stood with the straight posture Maria recognized from her own military days, but her eyes carried a weariness that spoke of profound loss. When she spoke, her English was accented but precise. Dr. Weber tells me, you help military veterans start businesses, Amara said. In Syria I ran a medical clinic for our unit. Here they tell me my medical degree is not valid, my experience doesn't matter. They offer me jobs cleaning offices or working in kitchen. Maria felt a familiar anger rising in her chest, the same emotion she'd experienced when Bradley had dismissed her as just a maid, but here the stakes were infinitely high. Amara wasn't just being underestimated, she was being systematically prevented from using skills that could save lives. What would you do if you could practice medicine here? Maria asked. Amara's eyes lit up for the first time during their conversation. There is great need in refugee communities. People are afraid to go to German hospitals. Language barriers, cultural differences, fear of authorities. I could start a clinic here, bridge that gap. Elena stepped forward. What obstacles are you facing beyond credential recognition? Everything, Amara replied with a bitter laugh. No money for certification courses, no connections to medical community, no understanding of German business regulations, and most importantly, no one who sees me as doctor instead of refugee. Carmen, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Ma'am, that sounds exactly like what Miss Santos faced. People judging you by your current situation instead of your capabilities. Maria nodded, but she was beginning to understand that the international challenges were more complex than she'd anticipated. In Seattle she'd worked within a system she understood, with veterans who shared her cultural context. Here they were dealing with language barriers, credential recognition issues, and refugees who faced legal restrictions on their ability to work or start businesses. Dr. Weber, Maria said, what would it take for Dr. Kassan to practice medicine in Germany? Klaus pulled out a thick folder: medical credential recognition, German language certification, residency training, business licensing, insurance requirement. The process typically takes 3 to 5 years, and costs approximately 50,000 euros. And during those 3 to 5 years, she cleans offices while people in her community go without medical care, Maria said, the frustration evident in her voice. Their next stop was even more challenging. Dmitry Petrov, a former Ukrainian military engineer, had been living in the camp for 2 years. His specialty was rebuilding infrastructure in war zones, exactly the kind of expertise needed for refugee camp improvement, but he'd been assigned to a factory job, making plastic containers. In Ukraine I rebuilt bridges, power systems, water treatment facilities, Dmitry explained through a translator. Here I push buttons on machine 8 hours per day. My supervisor is 23 years old, tells me I am lucky to have job. Elena was taking rapid note. This is the same pattern we saw in Seattle but magnified. These people have incredible skills and experience, but the system only sees them as laborers. As they continued their tour, the pattern became clear. Hassan al-Rahman, former Iraqi Air Force pilot, was working in a warehouse. Fatima al-Zahra, former Afghan Army intelligence officer, was cleaning hotels. Jorge Mendoza, former Colombian Special Forces, was doing construction labor. All of them possessed leadership experience, technical skills, and entrepreneurial potential that was being completely ignored. That evening in their hotel conference room, Maria's team held their first international strategy session. The challenges felt overwhelming. The legal barriers alone are staggering, Marcus Webb said via video call from Seattle. Every country has different credential recognition processes, business registration requirements, and restrictions on refugee employment. The cultural barriers might be even harder, Carmen observed. In Seattle, veterans shared common military culture with. Here, we're dealing with people from completely different military traditions, languages, and business practices. Elena pulled up their preliminary assessment. We've interviewed 47 refugee veterans. So far, the average time in camps is 22 months. Average skill utilization rate is less than 10%. These are doctors working as dishwashers, engineers working as janitors, pilots working as laborers. Dr. Weber joined them for dinner, bringing sobering statistics about the broader refugee crisis. The European Union spends €23 billion annually on refugee support, he explained, but only 12% of refugees are employed in jobs that match their skills. The waste of human potential is staggering. What we're seeing isn't just about veterans, Maria realized. It's about how entire societies systematically undervalue people based on their current circumstances, rather than their capabilities. Carmen leaned forward. Miss Santos, this feels like the penthouse situation, but multiplied by millions. These people are invisible, not because of prejudice, but because of bureaucracy. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She walked to the hotel window overlooking the refugee camp, thinking about Amara, Dimitri, Hassan, and the dozens of others they'd met. Each person represented not just wasted potential, but human dignity being systematically eroded by well-meaning but broken systems. Her phone buzzed with a message from Bradley Whitman. Maria, I've been researching German business regulation. The startup process is incredibly complex, but I think I've found some legal pathways. Microsoft Germany wants to help with technology infrastructure. Another message came from Trevor Morrison. Victoria Blackstone's European division is willing to donate office space in Berlin, Munich and Frankfurt for program operations. No cost, long-term leases, but the most important message came from an unexpected source. General Patricia Hayes had sent an encrypted communication. Miss Santos, the Joint Chiefs have been following your assessment in Berlin. We're prepared to provide liaison support with NATO allies to address credential recognition issues for refugee veterans. This is bigger than business development. It's about international security and stability. Maria realized that what they were confronting wasn't just a refugee crisis, or even a veteran reintegration challenge. It was a fundamental question about how societies value human potential. The same forces that had made her invisible in a Seattle penthouse were operating on a global scale, preventing millions of people from contributing their skills and experience to their new communities. The next morning brought their biggest test yet. Dr. Weber arrived with news that would determine whether their pilot program could continue. The German parliament is voting next week on new restrictions for refugee programs, he announced grimly. There's been political pressure from business groups who claim that preferential treatment for refugees creates unfair competition. Maria felt a chill of recognition. The same opposition they'd faced in Seattle, the fear that helping undervalued people would somehow harm those already in power, was manifesting on a national political level. How much time do we have? Elena asked. 6 days, Dr. Weber. 6 days to prove that investing in refugee veteran potential creates value rather than just redistributing it. Carmen looked at Maria with determination. Ma'am, what do we do? Maria stood at the window, looking out at the refugee camp where hundreds of former military leaders, doctors, engineers and entrepreneurs were being systematically prevented from using their skills to help themselves and their communities. We do what we've always done, she said quietly. We prove that treating people with dignity and recognizing their potential creates better outcomes than keeping them invisible. But this time, they had 6 days to demonstrate it to an entire parliament, with the future of millions of refugee veterans hanging in the balance. The abandoned warehouse in Berlin's Kreuzberg district had been transformed overnight into a bustling command center. Maria Santos stood in the middle of controlled chaos as her international team worked around the clock to create something unprecedented. A fully functional demonstration of refugee veteran entrepreneurship in less than a week. Elena Rodriguez coordinated logistics from a makeshift desk surrounded by laptops, phones, and stacks of German bureaucratic forms. Carmen Vasquez moved between workstations, translating conversations, and ensuring military veterans from different countries could communicate effectively. The stakes had never been higher. Status report, Maria called out at 6 a.m. on day 2 of their countdown. Dr. Amara Kassim looked up from where she was organizing medical supplies donated by a network of German doctors who had heard about their project. The mobile clinic is operational. We have volunteer translators, basic equipment, and 3 German physicians willing to supervise while I treat patients. In the 48 hours since learning about the parliamentary deadline, Amara had done the impossible. Using connections provided by Bradley Whitman's technology network, she'd connected with German medical professionals who were willing to bend regulations to let her practice under supervision. The mobile clinic would serve the refugee camp while documenting the demand for culturally competent medical care. Dmitry Petrov emerged from behind a wall of construction equipment, his engineer's mind having designed a water filtration system for the refugee camp using donated material. System is ready for installation, he announced in careful English. Will provide clean water for 500 people, reduce disease by estimated. Hassan al-Ramain, the former Iraqi pilot, had partnered with a German aviation company to create a drone delivery system for medical supplies and food distribution throughout the camp. His military logistics expertise was solving problems the camp administrators had struggled with for months. But the most ambitious project belonged to Jorge Mendoza, the Colombian Special Forces veteran. Working with Marcus Webb via video conference, he'd navigated German business regulations to register the first refugee-owned security consulting firm in Berlin. His company would provide safety assessments and protection services for refugee communities, services desperately needed but never considered by traditional aid organizations. Dr. Klaus Weber arrived at noon with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The Parliament committee wants a demonstration tomorrow. They're bringing business leaders, economists, and aid organization representatives. You have 18 hours to show them that this works. Maria gathered her core team around a conference table, constructed from sawhorses and plywood. The maps, charts, and business plans, spread across its surface, represented 5 days of concentrated effort to prove that treating refugees as assets, rather than burdens, could transform entire communities. Where do we stand? She asked. Elena consulted her tablet. 4 functioning businesses operational. Medical clinic has treated 127 patients in 3 days, with 98% satisfaction ratings. Dimitri's water system is providing clean water to 500 people. Hassan's drone delivery has reduced food distribution time by 7. Jorge's security firm has prevented 3 potential conflicts and is already getting contracts from other refugee organizations. Carmen added, more importantly, we've documented everything: patient outcomes, cost savings, efficiency improvements, job creation. The numbers are incredible. But Dr. Weber looked troubled. There's political pressure building. Friedrich Richter, the head of the German Business Federation, is leading opposition to your program. He's arguing that providing special support to refugees creates unfair advantages over German entrepreneurs. Maria felt the familiar weight of confronting entrenched power structures. What's his specific objection? He claims that if refugees get preferential loans and streamlined regulations, it damages German businesses that have to follow normal procedures. He's scheduled to speak to the Parliament committee right before your presentation. The irony wasn't lost on Maria. Once again, she was facing people who saw opportunity as a zero-sum game, the belief that helping others somehow diminished their own success. That evening, Bradley Whitman arrived on a flight from Seattle, carrying technology equipment and something more valuable, data from the Foundation's American operation. Maria, he said, setting up his presentation materials, I've brought 5 years of economic impact studies from our Seattle work. Every dollar invested in veteran entrepreneurship generated 4.3 cities in local economic activity. Companies that hired our veterans saw productivity. Crime rates dropped 15% in neighborhoods where we placed veteran-owned businesses. Elena looked up from her laptop. The same patterns are already showing here. The medical clinic reduced emergency room visits by 30%. The water system prevented an estimated outbreak of waterborne illness that would have cost the German healthcare system €200,000. Hassan's delivery system saved the camp administration 40 hours of labor costs daily. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Carmen Vasquez had been conducting interviews with German citizens living near the refugee camp, and her findings challenged every assumption about refugee integration. Ms. Santos, Carmen reported, the German community isn't opposed to refugee success, they're opposed to refugee dependence. The business owners I interviewed said their biggest concern is the long-term cost of supporting people who aren't contributing. When I showed them what Dr. Qasim, Dimitri, Hassan and Jorge are accomplishing, they were impressed. She pulled out surveys and interview transcripts. 87% of local German business owners said they'd prefer to work with self-sufficient refugee entrepreneurs rather than support indefinite aid programs. They want partnerships, not charity. Maria realized they had been framing the issue incorrectly. This wasn't about refugees versus Germans or special treatment versus fairness. It was about creating systems that allowed everyone to contribute their maximum potential. The next morning brought their biggest ally yet. General Patricia Hayes arrived with a delegation from NATO headquarters, including German military leadership. Ms. Santos, General Hayes announced, the Joint Chiefs have completed their analysis of your program's security implications. Refugee veterans who are economically integrated are 89% less likely to experience radicalization. Countries with successful veteran integration programs show 45% better outcomes in refugee community stability. The German general accompanying her, Klaus Zimmermann, added, "We've been monitoring the camp since your program started. Reported conflicts down 60%, community organization up 200. These aren't just business metrics, they're security metrics." But time was running out. Friedrich Richter and the German Business Federation had organized their own demonstration, complete with economic analyses showing the costs of special refugee programs and testimonials from German business owners claiming unfair competition. As Maria's team prepared for the parliamentary presentation, Dr. Weber delivered final intelligence about their opposition. Richter has powerful allies, he warned, banking industry, traditional aid organizations and politicians who see refugee support as a drain on resources. They're arguing that your approach is unrealistic, unsustainable, and unfair to German citizens. Maria looked around the warehouse at the evidence of what refugee veterans could accomplish when given dignity and opportunity. In 5 days, they'd created businesses, solved problems, and demonstrated economic value that traditional aid programs had failed to achieve in years. Dr. Weber, she said quietly, what would happen if this vote failed? The legislation would effectively end refugee entrepreneurship programs across Germany. Other EU countries would likely follow. The precedent would spread globally. Millions of refugee veterans would remain in camps indefinitely, their skills unused, their potential wasted. Elena, Carmen, Bradley, and the refugee veterans gathered around Maria. The same group dynamic that had supported her through the Seattle challenges was now operating on an international stage with global implications. 5 years ago, Maria said, I was invisible in a penthouse while people decided my worth based on their assumptions. Tomorrow, millions of refugee veterans face the same judgment. We have 12 hours to prove that human potential shouldn't be wasted because of fear, prejudice, or bureaucratic convenience. Carmen straightened to attention. Ma'am, what are your orders? Maria smiled at the young veteran's military bearing. We do what Marines do best, Sergeant. We accomplish the mission, no matter the odds. But as they prepared for the most important presentation of Maria's life, she knew that tomorrow would determine whether her journey from invisible maid to international advocate would result in liberation for millions, or whether the forces of indifference and fear would once again render deserving people invisible. The chamber of the German Parliament's Committee on Integration and Migration was packed beyond capacity. News crews from around the world lined the walls, their cameras focused on the podium, where the fate of millions of refugee veterans would be decided. Maria Santos sat in the front row, flanked by Elena Rodriguez and Carmen Vasquez, watching as Friedrich Richter delivered his closing arguments against refugee entrepreneurship. Honorable committee members, Richter proclaimed, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard, we must consider the practical implications of these so-called dignity-based programs. Germany already spends €4.2 billion annually on refugee support. Now we're asked to provide additional preferential treatment that gives refugees advantages our own citizens don't enjoy. He gestured to a presentation showing economic charts and statistics, small business loans with reduced interest rates, streamlined regulations, specialized support services. These benefits aren't available to German entrepreneurs starting their own companies. How is this fair to the taxpayers funding these programs? Dr. Klaus Weber leaned over to Maria. He's been speaking for 20 minutes. Very polished, very convincing to people who see this as a financial issue rather than a human potential issue. Maria watched the committee members' faces as Richter continued his presentation. Some nodded along with his economic argument. Others looked skeptical but uncertain. The committee chairwoman, Dr. Angela Hoffman, maintained a neutral expression that revealed nothing about her position. Furthermore, Richter continued, "We must question whether this American model can work in German society. Different cultures, different economic structures, different social systems. What works in Seattle cannot simply be transplanted to Berlin." He paused for effect, looking directly at Maria. "With all respect to Santos's achievements in the United States, we must make decisions based on German realities, not American experiments." Bradley Whitman, sitting behind Maria, whispered, "He's trying to make you seem like an outsider imposing foreign solution." Carmen shifted in her seat, her military bearing evident even while sitting. "Ma'am, he's doing exactly what they did to you in the penthouse, dismissing you based on assumptions instead of evidence." When Richter finished to polite applause, Dr. Hoffman called Maria to the podium. As she walked toward the front of the chamber, Maria felt the weight of every refugee veteran she'd met in the past week. Dr. Amira Kassam was in the audience. Having taken time away from her mobile clinic, Dmitry Petrov sat with his engineering plans spread across his lap. Hassan al-Rahman and Jorge Mendoza flanked them, their success stories documented in the presentation Maria was about to give. "Honorable committee members," Maria began, her voice steady and clear. "5 years ago I was invisible. For 3 years I cleaned, organized and maintained a luxury penthouse in Seattle while the tenant and his friends discussed me as if I didn't exist. They called me just a maid and assumed I was grateful for the opportunity to serve them." The chamber was completely silent. Even the news crews had stopped moving, focused on her words. What they didn't know was that I owned the penthouse, the building, and held the mortgage on the tenant's entire lifestyle. I was a decorated Marine Corps veteran with a business empire, but they saw only what they expected to see based on their prejudices. She gestured toward Amira, Dmitry, Hassan and Jorge in the audience. "Today I see the same dynamic playing out with refugee veterans." Dr. Amira Kassam ran a medical clinic in Syria, but here she's offered jobs cleaning offices. Dmitry Petrov rebuilt infrastructure in war zones, but he's assigned to factory work. Hassan al-Rahman commanded air operations, but he's working in a warehouse. Maria activated the presentation screen behind her. "Mr. Richter asks about fairness and economic impact. Let me show you the numbers from our 5-day demonstration." The first slide showed medical statistics. Dr. Kassam's mobile clinic treated 127 patients in 3 days, reducing emergency room visits by 30. Cost savings to German healthcare, €89,000 in 3 days alone. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as committee members processed the implication. Dmitry Petrov's water filtration system provides clean water for 500 refugees, preventing waterborne illness outbreaks. Estimated cost savings, €200,000 in avoided healthcare expenses. The next slide showed Hassan's logistic improvement. Colonel al-Rahman's delivery system reduced food distribution costs by 40%, while improving nutrition access by 75%. Jorge Mendoza's security firm prevented 3 conflicts that would have required police intervention, saving an estimated €15,000 in emergency response costs. Dr. Hoffman leaned forward with interest. "Ms. Santos, these are impressive short-term results, but Mr. Richter raises valid concerns about long-term sustainability and fairness to German citizens." Maria had anticipated this question. "Madam Chairwoman, Every program we've implemented creates value for the broader community. Dr. Kassam's clinic serves not just refugees, but German citizens who need culturally competent medical care. Dimitri's engineering expertise is being contracted by German companies for infrastructure projects. Hassan's logistics innovations are being adopted by German aid organizations. She clicked to the next slide, showing employment statistics. In our Seattle program, veteran-owned businesses created 1,247 jobs for non-veterans. They generated $67 million in revenue, contributing $8.3 million in local taxes. Our refugee veterans aren't taking opportunities from Germans. They're creating new opportunities. General Klaus Zimmermann stood from the audience. Madam Chairwoman, may I address the security implications? Dr. Hoffman nodded. From a military perspective, economically integrated refugee veterans represent enhanced security rather than increased risk. Idle populations breed instability. Productive populations build stability. Ms. Santos's program doesn't just solve economic problems, it prevents security problems. Richter requested permission to respond. These anecdotal examples don't address systemic concerns. How do we know this model can scale? How do we ensure German citizens aren't disadvantaged by preferential treatment for refugees? Maria returned to the podium. Mr. Richter, let me address your concerns directly. First, scaling. We've successfully replicated this model across 15 U.S. cities with consistent results. Second, fairness. Our programs create economic growth that benefits everyone. Property values increase, tax bases expand, crime rates decrease, community stability improves. She paused, making eye contact with committee members. But there's a deeper issue here. Ms. Richter's arguments assume that success is a zero-sum game, that helping refugees somehow harms Germans. 5 years of data proves the opposite. Communities that embrace refugee entrepreneurship outperform those that maintain dependency-based aid models. Elena stood and handed Maria a folder of documents. These are partnership requests from German businesses wanting to work with our refugee entrepreneurs. Mercedes-Benz wants to contract Dimitri's engineering firm. Siemens is interested in Hassan's logistics innovation. German medical organizations are requesting expansion of Dr. Kassam's clinic model. The chamber buzzed with surprised conversation. The question, Maria continued, isn't whether we can afford to support refugee entrepreneurship. The question is whether we can afford not. Every day, we keep skilled, experienced, motivated people in dependency status. We waste human potential that could be solving our problems and building our economy. Dr. Hoffman called for a brief recess. As committee members huddled in discussion, Maria rejoined her team. Carmen leaned over. Ma'am, you've got their attention, but I can see some committee members are still uncertain. Elena checked her phone. The live stream has 2.3 million viewers. Comments are overwhelmingly positive, but there's organized opposition too. Bradley pulled up news alerts on his tablet. Business groups across Europe are watching this. The precedent set here will influence refugee policy across the EU. When the session reconvened, Dr. Hoffman's expression was serious. Ms. Santos, the committee appreciates your presentation and the evidence you've provided. However, implementing your recommendations would require significant changes to existing policies and substantial funding commitments. Maria stood for her final statement. Madam Chairwoman, 5 years ago, one person's decision to stop accepting invisibility changed dozens of lives in Seattle. Today, your committee's decision will determine whether millions of refugee veterans remain invisible or become the solution to challenges we haven't even recognized yet. She gestured toward the refugee veterans in the audience. Dr. Kassam, Dimitri, Hassan, and Jorge represent just 4 examples of the potential sitting in refugee camps across Europe. The question before this committee isn't technical or economic, it's moral. Do we believe human dignity has value? Do we believe potential should be recognized regardless of current circumstances? The chamber fell silent. As Maria concluded, you have the power to ensure that no veteran, regardless of their country of origin, ever has to remain invisible again. The choice is yours. As she returned to her seat, Maria knew she had given everything she had to offer. The vote would come within the hour, and with it, the fate of her life's mission on a global scale. The silence in the German parliament chamber was deafening, as Dr. Angela Hoffmann prepared to announce the committee's decision. Maria Santos sat with her hands folded, her military training keeping her composed, despite knowing that the next words would determine the fate of millions of invisible people around the world. After careful deliberation, Dr. Hoffmann began, her voice carrying across the packed chamber. The Committee on Integration and Migration has reached a unanimous decision. Maria felt Carmen Vasquez tense beside her. Elena Rodriguez gripped her notebook so tightly her knuckles had turned white. In the audience, Dr. Amara Kasum, Dmitry Petrov, Hassan Al-Rahman, and Jorge Mendoza sat perfectly still, their military bearing evident, even in civilian clothes. The evidence presented by Santos and her team demonstrates not just the economic viability of refugee veteran entrepreneurship, but the moral imperative to recognize human potential regardless of current circumstances. Dr. Hoffmann paused, looking directly at Maria. We hereby approve the implementation of the Santos Foundation methodology across all German refugee integration programs, with an initial funding commitment of €200 million over 3 years. The chamber erupted. Applause thundered from every corner as journalists scrambled to report the historic decision. But Dr. Hoffmann wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, raising her voice above the noise, Germany will formally request that the European Union adopt this model across all member nations. We will also petition the United Nations to establish the Santos Dignity Protocol as the international standard for refugee veteran integration. Maria felt tears streaming down her face for the first time since her military service. But through her emotion, she noticed something extraordinary happening in the chamber. Friedrich Richter, the man who had led the opposition, was walking toward her. The business leader who had argued against refugee entrepreneurship stopped in front of Maria and extended his hand. Miss Santos, he said, his voice carrying genuine respect. I was wrong. Your presentation didn't just change my mind about refugee policy, it changed how I think about human potential entirely. He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. I've spent 20 years in business thinking that success was about competing for limited resources. You've shown me that success is about recognizing unlimited human capability. I want to personally fund the expansion of your program to every refugee camp in Germany. Before Maria could respond, something even more remarkable began happening. Committee members were standing, one by one, not just to applaud but to share their own stories. Dr. Hoffmann spoke first. My grandfather was a refugee after World War II. He was a skilled clockmaker, but when he arrived in America, he was only offered work as a janitor. It took him 15 years to prove his worth. Ms. Santos, you've created a system that would have recognized his value immediately. Committee member Hans Miller stood next. My daughter is a military veteran, struggling to find work that matches her intelligence and experience. Your model doesn't just help refugees, it helps all veterans, all people who've been underestimated by systems that judge on appearance rather than capability. Then something unprecedented occurred. The live stream of the parliamentary session, which had reached 4.7 million viewers worldwide, began generating a global response in real time. Elena read from her phone. Messages are pouring in from every continent. Veterans, refugees, immigrants, minorities, women, elderly workers, people who've been made invisible by various systems. They're saying this decision gives them hope, but the most powerful moment came when Dr. Amara Kasum was invited to speak. 5 days ago, she said, her accent thick with emotion, I was invisible, a doctor reduced to cleaning offices while my medical knowledge went unused. Today, I have treated over 200 patients, saved the German healthcare system tens of thousands of euros, and been invited to join the medical faculty at Charité Hospital. She looked directly at the cameras broadcasting worldwide. But this is not really about me, or about refugees, or even about veterans. This is about a simple truth. Every person you encounter has value, potential, and dignity that deserves to be seen and recognized. Carmen stood up, her young voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned profound lessons. 6 months ago, I was transitioning out of the army, terrified that civilian employers would only see a young Latina veteran, instead of my capabilities as an intelligence analyst and potential business leader. Ms. Santos didn't just give me opportunity, she gave me the power to see my own worth. Carmen's voice grew stronger, but the real lesson isn't about individual success, it's about how treating people with dignity creates exponential positive change. When you see potential instead of problems, when you recognize capability instead of circumstance, you don't just help one person, you transform entire communities. Bradley Whitman approached the microphone, and the irony of the moment wasn't lost on anyone who knew the story's origin. 5 years ago, I was the person who called Ms. Santos just a maid. I represented everything wrong with how our society judges worth, by appearance, by position, by our own prejudices and assumptions. His voice cracked with emotion. Ms. Santos could have destroyed my life when she revealed who she really was. Instead, she gave me the opportunity to become someone better. She taught me that real power comes from lifting others up, not putting them down. That real success is measured by how many people you empower, not how many you control. He looked directly at the cameras. To everyone watching this, look around you. The custodian in your office building might be a brilliant engineer from another country. The home health aide, caring for your elderly parent, might be a former military officer with leadership experience you can't imagine. The quiet woman organizing your files might own the building you work in. As the formal session ended, Maria found herself surrounded by people whose lives had been transformed by the simple act of being seen and valued. But she realized the transformation had been mutual. Helping others recognize their potential had shown her the true scope of her own. Elena approached with final statistics that would define the global legacy of this moment. Maria, in the 6 hours since the parliamentary vote, 17 countries have requested implementation partnerships. The UN Secretary General wants to meet with you next week about global adoption. Microsoft, Mercedes-Benz, Siemens, and 43 other multinational corporations have committed funding for international expansion, but the number that mattered most came from Carmen. Ma'am, the refugee camps are reporting something unprecedented. Word has spread about what happened here today. Veterans who had given up hope are asking about business training programs. People are standing taller, speaking up, believing in their potential again. As Maria prepared to leave the chamber, Dr. Hoffman approached with one final announcement. Ms. Santos, the German Chancellor, will be making an official statement tomorrow, but I wanted you to know, Germany is proposing that the United Nations establish an annual International Day of Human Dignity, commemorating today's decision, and the principle that every person deserves to be seen, valued, and empowered. Walking out of the Parliament building into the Berlin sunset, Maria reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From an invisible maid in a Seattle penthouse to an international advocate whose work would impact millions of lives across the globe. But the true victory wasn't in the recognition, the funding, or even the policy changes. The true victory was in the faces of people like Amara, Dimitri, Hassan, Jorge, and Carmen, people who would never again accept being invisible, who would demand to be seen for their potential, rather than judged by their circumstances. As news of the German decision spread globally, a movement began that would transform how societies value human potential. The story of the maid, who owned everything, had become the foundation for a world where no one would ever have to be just anything again. The revolution of dignity had begun, and it started with a simple truth: how you treat people when you think they don't matter reveals everything about who you really are, but more importantly, how you choose to see the potential in others determines what kind of world you help create. Maria Santos had learned that lesson in a penthouse kitchen 5 years ago. Today, she had taught it to the world, and that world would never be the same.
You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.